The Health Secretary faces criticism for saying that people shouldn't cower from coronavirus. Sajid Javid's words were called insensitive by bereaved families. He's now apologised and said he did not mean to minimise the impact of COVID. Ministers are to meet tomorrow to discuss how exemptions from isolation will work, as businesses say there is still too much uncertainty. And as another fall in new infections is recorded, we'll be looking at the latest data. Also tonight, police warn of the dangers of open water after 3 people, including a 9-year-old, drowned in Loch Lomond. And in Tokyo, Chelsea Giles becomes Team GB's first medalist with her bronze in judo, while Adam Peaty is now just hours away from the race, which he hopes will bring him Olympic gold again.
Well, you know, I'm the best racer in the world, I think, so I'm looking forward to it.
Good evening. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has apologised for saying that people shouldn't cower from the coronavirus after being criticised by opposition parties and by families bereaved during the pandemic. He'd used the word in a tweet posted after recovering from COVID himself and was accused of insensitivity and causing hurt. Meanwhile, it's emerged that ministers are considering whether double vaccination should be required of football fans attending Premier League matches. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
Good morning.
He's been Health Secretary for just a month.
Nice to meet you. My first visit to a hospital on the job.
But in a tweet announcing his own recovery from coronavirus yesterday, Sajid Javid said people should get vaccinated and learn to live with COVID rather than cower from the virus. The rebuke from opposition parties and bereaved families was swift.
We're very disappointed at yet another barbed comment from a minister of the government. We find the comments distasteful, disrespectful to our loss and insensitive, quite frankly.
Labour said Sajid Javid had insulted the many people still shielding from COVID and trying to stay safe. And this morning the Health Secretary deleted his original tweet and said he was wrong to say cower. I was expressing gratitude that the vaccines help us fight back as a society, he wrote, but it was a poor choice of word and I sincerely apologise. But Mr Javid's bullish tone reflects a government pushing on with opening up England in the face of very high infections. About 70% of adults have now had both jabs, and ministers want to put pressure on younger people to get vaccinated. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister announced that proof of vaccination would be required at nightclubs in England from the end of September. And a similar plan is being considered for Premier League football matches too. No decision has been taken, and talks between ministers and the league are at an early stage.
I think our members are reflective of the wider society, so there will be some who feel that this will give them the kind of reassurance they need in order to return safely to games. Equally, there'll be others who are opposed to it in principle.
Some events, like this weekend's Latitude Festival, required tests or proof of vaccination for entry, and making that mandatory for other large-scale indoor and outdoor events would be strongly opposed by some Tory MPs. At the start of the year, ministers said they had no plans for people in England to show proof they'd had both jabs. But it's now clear some freedoms will come with that condition. Ben Wright, BBC News.
Well, the latest daily figures on coronavirus show a fall in the number of new infections for a 5th day. Our health correspondent Jim Reid is here in the studio to go through the data. What are the numbers, Jim?
Good evening, Michelle. So the UK reported 29,173 further cases. You can see here in the last 24-hour period. So that means the average of new cases over the last week was 38,268. And you can see on this graph here on the right-hand side the fall we've seen recently. A further 28 deaths have been recorded in the past 24 hours. And if you look at the graph there, you can see the effect of the vaccine on reducing hospital admissions as well. We're going to see it here on the right-hand side, far below infections. And in terms of vaccines, more than 46 million people have now had their first jab, and over 37 million people have now had that second jab. They're now fully vaccinated.
And those figures, which again show a drop in the number of new daily infections, how much can we read into that?
I mean, very, very encouraging news. One scientist I spoke to earlier today described that recent decline as remarkable in his words. As you said, 5 days in a row now of falling cases across the UK. The last time we saw that was way back in February. You always have to be cautious about reading too much into these daily figures, but if we look at what happened in Scotland, we started to see a fall in cases there earlier, about 3 weeks ago now. Scientists there putting that fall down to perhaps the Scottish national team being knocked out earlier of the European Football Championships, perhaps the school term in Scotland finishing earlier. The interesting thing we've seen, though, is that trend continuing in Scotland and also now start to be reflected elsewhere in the UK. In England, there is a note of caution at the moment. We saw this relaxation of some rules last Monday, for example, allowing nightclubs to reopen again. We're unlikely to see the impact of that on these figures until sometime next week.
Jim, thank you very much. Jim Reid, our health correspondent there. Well, at the same time, some business sectors have been calling on the government to give more clarity about the new schemes which will enable some workers to be exempt from the rules on self-isolation. Ben Wright, whose report you heard a little earlier, is back with us now from Westminster. Will they get that clarity, Ben?
Well, Mishal, the schemes for testing key workers who have been pinged or contacted by Test and Trace are meant to be up and running tomorrow. Now, I understand that supermarket distribution centres will be testing their employees then, with hundreds of other sites opening during the week. But there certainly have been complaints that this has all been jacked up in quite a hurry and that some critical workers have been left out. Now, ministers are going to meet tomorrow to review that list of exemptions, and it's possible that some other workers might be added to it, council refuse collectors, for instance, but no decisions have been taken yet. What is clear, though, is that despite this slight drop in infections we've been hearing about, the current rules around self-isolation for everybody else will remain in place until August the 16th. There have been calls from businesses, Tory MPs, the Labour Mayor of London to end that self-isolation much sooner for people who've been double jabbed. But the government thinks cases could easily rise again and that this is one of the only lines of defence that they have.
Ben Wright in Westminster, thank you. Extreme caution is being advised for people considering swimming in lochs and rivers after several deaths in Scotland in the last 48 hours. They include a 9-year-old boy and 2 adults who drowned at Loch Lomond. Another child is in hospital. Police Scotland are warning that open water swimming can be extremely dangerous with the risk of deep water and hidden currents. Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
An idyllic location. Loch Lomond was busy as usual today, with many enjoying the scorching weather. But yesterday evening, it's believed that 2 adults and 2 young children got into difficulty in the water near Ardlui. A 9-year-old boy, a man and a woman died at the scene. Police said a 7-year-old boy was taken to hospital. This followed the death of a teenage boy also at Loch Lomond on Friday. Those who run this stunning national park said this has been one of the worst weekends in its history. Police Scotland said the number of deaths is hard to comprehend and urged people to take care. As many of us have been enjoying the recent heat wave, one charity said more than 30 people have drowned in the UK in the last 2 weeks.
Deep bodies of water rarely gets above 18 degrees, and if you can compare that to a swimming pool where people learn to swim, which is normally regulated at around 30 degrees, we can see that there's a huge gap in people's knowledge compared to swimming in a swimming pool and swimming in deep bodies of cold open water.
Also this weekend, in 2 separate incidents, an 11-year-old boy drowned in South Lanarkshire, and the body of a 13-year-old boy was recovered from a river in Lanark. Scotland's First Minister said it was heartbreaking. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News, Loch Lomond.
In other news today, 2 London hospitals, Newham and Whipps Cross, have declared major incidents and redirected ambulances after torrential rain caused them to be flooded. Thunderstorms moving across the southeast of England brought flash floods to many parts of London, affecting train stations, shops and homes. A yellow weather warning for more thunderstorms remains in place until midnight for a large area stretching from Plymouth to Norwich. MPs have called the Armed Forces complaints process for sexual harassment or assault at work wholly inadequate. A report from the Defence Select Committee said 60% of female personnel had faced bullying, harassment and discrimination during their careers. The Ministry of Defence says many improvements have been made, but it admits women's experience isn't yet equal to men's. The Home Secretary Priti Patel has said she remains determined to stop migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats after 378 arrived in England today. The French authorities said they'd intercepted a further 5 boats. So far this year, 8,500 migrants have made the sea crossing to the UK. Now, Team GB won their first medals of the Tokyo Olympics today, a bronze for Chelsea Giles in judo and then a silver for Bradley Sinden in taekwondo. There was disappointment, however, for Jade Jones in the same sport. Twice an Olympic champion, she did not make it into the last 16 of her event in Tokyo. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks was watching.
At the Makahari Messe Hall, Britain's taekwondo players were chasing a place in the record books. Bradley Sinden is the reigning world champion at 68 kilos. He was desperate to become the first British man to win an Olympic title. But 19-year-old outsider Ulubeg Rashitov from Uzbekistan wasn't here to play.
And there's a kick to the head, 2 of them in a row.
The match swung back and forth, but Sinden was leading with just seconds of the match remaining.
Kick from Ulubeg Rashitov, tries a back kick.
But a Rashitov trunk kick meant Sinden had to go for it, and as his last gasp spin failed to connect, he knew the game and gold was up.
From Tashkent to Tokyo, he claims the Olympic title.
My coach always said Silver was the first loser, the best loser, but now maybe eventually I'll get over it, but for now it's got me that I didn't win gold.
Disappointment too back home in Doncaster, but from mum Cheryl, huge pride for her son on his Olympic debut.
I can't believe he's got a silver medal. It's an absolute massive achievement on top of obviously winning the Worlds. But I know he went for gold, so I know how disappointed he's going to be.
But this wasn't the only upset here today. Double Olympic champion Jade Jones was vying to become the first British woman to win gold at 3 different games, but today ended in tears.
Last-minute reassurance before starting her bid for history.
Well, they don't call her the headhunter for nothing. There is.
But the refugee team's Kimia Alizadeh Zanorin was the Rio bronze medalist and had beaten Jones in the past.
She's had the better of this second round.
In the final round, it was close, but with seconds left.
It could be that the double Olympic champion is going out.
Jones's camp couldn't bear the tension, and as her dreams crumbled in round 1...
What an upset!
Jade's teammate and housemate Bianca Walkden was left just as devastated.
I felt scared, I felt just too much pressure, and then the whole tournament has just been obviously different to what I'm used to. Used to have my family there, so when I am scared coming out, you know, just them cheering for me gives me that extra push to go for it.
Over in the judo, though, Chelsea Giles was handed a medal lifeline in the repechage after losing in the earlier rounds. A bronze was still up for grabs for the world number 10, and boy, did she grab it.
It's all over. It's all over.
Britain's first medal of the Games at the spiritual home of her sport.
The bronze medal.
2 medals then on day 2 for Britain. What will day 3 bring? Natalie Perks, BBC News, Tokyo.
Close. He was leading in that.
Well, meanwhile, Andy Murray has had to pull out of the tennis singles competition because of injury. Our sports editor Dan Roan is also in Tokyo, where he's been assessing how Japan sees these delayed and pandemic-affected games and also watching some of the new additions to the Olympics.
It's images like these that organisers hope will attract younger audiences to the Games.
That was incredible.
And on its Olympic debut, skateboarding's already provided one of the stories of Tokyo 2020.
The Tokyo local, amazing.
At a scorching skate park, hometown favourite Yuto Origome making history by winning the sport's first gold medal in the men's street competition, just a few miles from where the 22-year-old world champion grew up.
Everyone's helped me, everyone's texted me like you gotta go for it. I'm just so happy to bring the gold to my hometown.
Meanwhile, how's this for an overachieving family? On a fantastic day for the hosts, Japan's Uta Abe winning gold in the judo before older brother Hifumi did precisely the same just hours later in the same sport. although Tunisian Ahmed Hafnoui provided one of the game's biggest shocks.
How has he done that?
The teenager winning gold in the men's 400-metre freestyle after qualifying slowest in a result that stunned the sport.
For three.
And as if that wasn't enough, for the first time since 2004, the US men's basketball team lost in the Olympics, France pulling off a famous victory in a blow to the Americans' hopes of a fourth consecutive gold medal.
After so much opposition to these games, organisers will now be hoping that public enthusiasm is ignited by the gold medals that the hosts have won this opening weekend. Team GB have also, of course, opened their account now, but elsewhere today they experienced mixed fortunes.
Andy Murray will not defend his tennis singles title here. The two-time champion forced to withdraw with a quad strain before playing his first-round match. The 34-year-old choosing instead to focus on the men's doubles alongside Joe Salisbury, having been advised not to compete in both events. There had been hopes for Lizzie Dinan in the women's road race, but the British cyclist could only manage 11th as Austrian outsider Anna Kiesenhofer.
We've got the biggest upset we've ever seen in women's cycling in the Olympic Games.
Launched a remarkable solo breakaway to claim gold. Adam Peaty remains on course to become the first British swimmer to retain an Olympic title as he breezed into the 100 metres breaststroke final. The world record holder qualified fastest and will go for gold in the early hours of tomorrow morning.
I'm the best racer in the world, I think, so I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I wanted to be a little bit quicker this morning, but hey-ho, it's a morning swim. You never know what you're going to get.
Few dominate in their sport like Peaty, and after a day of surprises, it would need a huge one for the overwhelming favourite to be denied. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Tokyo.
And just before we go, have a look at this. It was last night above southern Norway, the sky lit up by an unusually large meteorite. There was a bright flash of light and also a booming sound as it came down, with some pieces of it thought to have landed west of Oslo. Quite a sight. Now on BBC One, time for the news, wherever you are this evening. Good night.
Hello, you're watching BBC News and I'm Lukwesa, Burak. Now, MPs have described as wholly inadequate the complaints process for women in the armed forces who are sexually assaulted or harassed at work.